This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Hey, you came back. You came back. Welcome in. I'm Erin Trafford, and you are listening to The Fourth Draft, a podcast about all things media strategy, communication strategy, podcasting, broadcasting, and the world of communicating. Because that's really what I am at my core. A storyteller, a communicator. I have done it professionally for my entire life. So, you know what? Finding a label, like what to call myself on LinkedIn, it's been a bit of a challenge. But of late, I've really settled into this media strategist title because it kind of acts as this great umbrella for all of the things that I like to do. I like to do all of this. All right, so if you're just joining us, welcome in. I might suggest that you just pause this episode and go back one episode, just one. Because The Fourth Draft is my new-ish podcast that was an evolution of my previous podcast called Permission to Leap from my previous business. I launched The Fourth Draft in earnest in 2023, and then shit got kind of real in life and in business. And as the CEO of a growing media company, my own personal pet project, of which this is, my team does not help me with this, by the way. So if you hear like edit screw-ups and whatever, it's completely because it's me. And that stuff is above my pay grade. But the team doesn't help me do this. I do this in my own time. So shit just got kind of real. And this fell off my plate. But I'm bringing it back because I think this is so critical to have these conversations given what has transpired in media and communications over the last year. And I don't want to mince words anymore. I don't want to hide anymore. I have decades and decades and decades of experience that I want to share with you. So a little bit, there was some imposter syndrome happening. There was just like a lot of things going on. And I've just, you know what? YOLO, gotten over it. And the reason I'm telling you this is not because I want you to, maybe you're laughing at me. Maybe you're laughing with me right now. I don't know. But I started a conversation in the last episode about trust. And I want to continue that today because trust is a bunch of things. But if your audience does not trust you, it is not their fault. It is yours. And I'm saying this as a point of self-reflection as well, that I realized I needed to get back on the mic, which is my flow state, which is where I love to be. I spent majority of my life on microphones in live radio, hosting talk shows, and it was always the way that I felt most connected to myself and to my truth. And I knew I needed to get back here to share with you and to bring you in because I value your trust. And I know that when I show up as my most authentic self, that when I show up as my most vulnerable self, it actually serves us both. So this is about filling everybody's cup up. And I talked about this in the last episode about how I think this metric of trust is going to be critical for brands going forward. We're going to have to redefine what we mean and how we build trust. Because not only is it this like ineffable, beautiful thing, trust falls into that same gorgeous bucket as love, as affection. How do you measure those things? I don't know when you look at them through that lens. But it's also becoming increasingly a metric of success. Increasingly a metric of success. And so I want to talk today about how to understand if your audience is trusting you, if you have maybe fallen into a habit of producing media and communications that is accidentally eroding trust. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to fix it. Obviously, it's going to be broad strokes. Depends on your situation, depends on what you do for a living, depends on your current media and communications plan. But I'm going to give you some little nuggets and hopefully some things will tweak for you. That'll start you really considering trust as a key pillar of whatever outcomes you are looking for this year. Trust has to be in there. So I'm going to say it again in a different way, because I said this at the beginning. If your audience doesn't trust you, it's not their fault, it's yours. The other way to look at this is that trust is no longer optional. It is now the foundation of your successful media strategy. And yet, I actually think that we've turned a corner where most organizations are losing trust without even realizing it. And I say this for brands, organizations, entrepreneurs, especially, oh my gosh, especially in the business coaching and consulting arena. And then also, I think it's happening in media broad strokes. And actually, I know we have some data and research that proves that trust is falling off of a cliff. I think, I have seen stats now. This is the far end of stats that, somewhere between 50 and 65% of people who watch mainstream media now have a sense of distrust in what they're hearing. A sense of distrust, not just blanket distrust, but they're wary. Is this really true? Are they telling me the truth? Is there a hidden agenda here? We hear that all the time. Now imagine that subconscious lack of trust in mainstream media seeps into the way your audience is interpreting your brand messages. Because I can tell you that is happening. That is happening. So we need to talk about trust. We can't get into the fourth draft any further without looking at this erosion of trust and how to build it back up again. So here are the common reasons. Now, I have said this has to be a blanket conversation. But here's some of the common reasons why I think over the last 18 months to 2 years, 3 years, really since 2020, we have started to see the widening of the trust gap where, the audience is really not in line with what you're saying. Whether they're able to articulate that or not doesn't actually matter. Okay. But the breakdown in the trust comes from the following things. And I'll go through this a little bit as we go. But the first thing, and I talked about this last episode, is this oversaturation of content. This is totally true if you are marketing on Instagram or you're doing this heavy webinar thing or you're into all these like email funnels. And I know a lot of people who are doing that still. And I know a lot of people who do it in integrity. But for a certain section of the audience, that oversaturation of content can actually lead them to not trusting you because they know that has been created in a vacuum, that you're not actually there talking to them, that you're not actually there trying to create community with them, that your objective was to just be the most visible and be the loudest in the room. So that trust gets eroded because the audience subconsciously, a section of the audience, I should say, subconsciously understands that more is not better. More is noise. And we've started to see some really healthy pushback against that kind of strategy where do more, be everywhere. Oh my God, I remember at one point I downloaded, I don't use TikTok. I don't do the TikToks, but at some point I got curious about the TikToks. And this was probably in 2022 or 2023. And I downloaded it for like a month. And I started looking at all these people who were on the TikTok saying, everything that was getting fed to me was about how to grow on TikTok was TikTok. So my whole algorithm was just, here's what to do on TikTok to get seen on TikTok. And it was just this serpent eating its own tail. And at the time I remember thinking like, oh my God, like they're saying that I have to post 4 times a day on TikTok because the whole game at the time, and this was similar to, I think, Instagram at the time and YouTube Shorts at the time, it was like the whole game was more. And when you produce more, like a good some chunk of that more is not actually what you want to say. It's not actually what you need to say. It's certainly not what your audience needs from you. And it's a waste of their time. So if you are doing things that are advocacy driven, policy driven, really important social issues driven, if you are an entrepreneur who is trying to attract high-end clients, If you are trying to change agendas, trying to change minds, recognize and respect your audience enough to know that they don't want their time wasted with your more is better content approach. That will make them think that you actually aren't committed to what you're trying to say. You're going to lose their trust, slowly but surely. So the other thing that contributes to the trust gap, so number one is this oversaturation of content, this more is better, just be everywhere, is inauthentic messaging. And I'm going to give you a really clear example of where this happened to me. And it did not have the results for the person that I was dealing with, I think, that she expected it to have. Inauthentic messaging is when you say to your audience what you think they want you to say. And you are not actually, A, answering their question clearly, or B, being honest. If somebody asks you a question or you want to put something out on social media and you don't have an answer, your answer should be, I don't have an answer. You have to value the truth over phoning it in. You have to. This is going to be a must in 2025. And in fact, back to my first point, if you don't have something to say about something that is meaningful, that isn't true from your heartstrings to their ears, true, silence is better. In the majority of situations, not every situation. I told you this is blanket advice. There's always going to be an exception, folks, but silence is better. And I'm going to give you a very clear example. So I had engaged with an individual, was looking for some help with the business strategy. And so I was just starting to look around and see what was possible. And I found this individual. Now, this should have been the first red flag, is that there was an oversaturation of content, a crazy amount of content. There was a podcast, there was a newsletter, there was Instagram Reels, there were workshops, there was LinkedIn, there was YouTube. There was an oversaturation of content. And in fact, I realized that this entire business, this person's entire business, was set up to simply facilitate that oversaturation of content. So she was effectively unignorable. You couldn't ignore. Once you got into that sphere, you couldn't ignore it. It was everywhere, tons and tons of touch points. And that was the strategy that this person was peddling, was just create more touch points and people will buy. Create more touch points and people will buy. The problem is, to the inauthentic messaging, when those touch points actually distance you from your audience and require you to use messaging that doesn't truly resonate, because you're trying to be everywhere. So you have to say the same thing to everybody, but not everybody wants to hear the same thing. So you're going to end up being inauthentic. So I ended up getting on a call with this person, and out of the gate, the first thing she said is, I know you, I'm just like you. And I was like, you don't know me. You're not just like me. It was inauthentic, but that was part of the playbook. It was inauthentic messaging. She was phoning it in. Surprise, surprise, did not result in a sale. In fact, it left a very sour taste in my mouth. Your audience can tell when you're using a playbook that is not authentic. Which leads to the last thing, and we talked about this in the last episode. The other thing that erodes this trust gap, or rather makes it bigger, is this lack of adaptability. So what this person was missing was adaptability in her process, in her messaging process. She had a process. It was very rigid. She treated everybody the same way, probably used an 80-20 or a 90-10, which is where 80 or 90% of your communications and media are baked, rigid, established, and you only customize that last 20 to 10% to the person in front of you. There was a lack of adaptability, and that led to negative results. Your media plan going forward, in order to bake trust in, you're going to have to be adaptable. You're going to have to meet your audience where they are. You can't rely on this rigid structure anymore. It's not going to work. It's going to backfire. So let's look at, what does trust look like? Okay, if these three things lead to an erosion of trust, oversaturation of content, inauthentic messaging, and a lack of adaptability, then what leads to more trust? How do we fix it? You're like, oh gosh, Erin, for the last year, we've been just pumping out content based on this calendar and based on what, the Instagram and YouTube and LinkedIn gurus said. And what if I've accidentally caused my audience to be a little wary of me? So here's a few things you can consider. We're going to define the new way of creating trust. Number one is being authentic. And this is where I come back to that whole idea of like, if you've got nothing to say, you can still contribute to the conversation by commenting on what other people are saying, by being honest and saying we're still coming to terms with this situation, but here's what we know. That's an okay response. You don't always have to be reactive and have all the answers. You need to be authentic and present the truth as you see it, safely and in a way that's aligned with your brand values. That's what you need to do. Focus on being authentic. You'll also hear me say at this point that being real in any situation is going to beat being perfect. So back to that circumstance that I just explained to you is where she had showed up and said, oh my goodness, I know nothing about you. Tell me about you. Would have probably saved the situation. But instead, she pretended she knew everything about me. And I knew that she did not. See what I'm saying? Now, that was in a sales situation, but it works in just a general calm situation as well. The other consideration here, so authenticity can help you fix that trust gap. The other one is transparency, is your audience really does not need you to be flawless. And I think I naturally adhere to this because I have lived so much of my life in the public eye. I built my last business. I built in public. People saw what I was doing. I was very, very upfront when things started to go wrong. I've been as I say, safely transparent as I can possibly be with all of the push and pull of being a female executive in media, of being a mother of 2 young children, of needing a life, of having health struggles, of all of the things. I am very upfront about that. And my clients, our clients at SSN and the clients that I work with, they're attracted to me for that. They're magnetized to me for that. And I'm positive there are people out there who think that I'm doing too much and showing too much of myself. Oh, that's not professional. That's not professional. Listen, not for me. Not for me. And that's okay. My transparency is building trust with the people who I want to work with. They love me for it. And here's the last one, and this is probably the most powerful one. The most powerful remedy to that trust gap is responsiveness. Note I'm not saying reaction. It's not reactivity. It's responsiveness. And what does responsiveness require? It actually requires that you listen more and you broadcast less. 2025, fixing the trust gap, is going to be an exercise in listening to your audience, in meeting that audience where they are, with all that you can authentically bring to them in that moment. It's all coming back down to this act of listening. For the last 3 years, most of comms and media strategy, digital, social, whatever, has been broadcast. Get it out there. Be more. Be everywhere. Just hit them with all the touch points, and that will become the conversion you're looking for. And now the pullback is happening. Now it's listen. Be responsive. Be authentic. Be adaptable. You need those things. And if you're sitting there thinking, oh, don't even know where to start, we have this huge strategic plan and we've got to hit our objectives, you can still smash your success metrics approaching media strategy this way. In fact, I like to say this actually makes it easier. It does not have to be so hard. You get to drop a lot of the dead weight by going this route. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you're starting to see where you might be able to do some, auditing of that trust. And if it helps, go back through the last 10 things that your brand produced or your organization produced and just have an honest conversation. Do they really reflect where you are today? Are they stuck in the past? Are they lacking a little bit of authenticity? Were you really listening when you put that out? And then, as I said in the last episode, if there is a way for you internally to develop a metric that starts to measure that trust, even better. Even better. One foot in front of the other, folks. Rome was not built in a day. This is not going to happen next week. This is probably going to take you a good 12 months to turn this ship if you feel like you have fallen into the trust gap. Step 1 is acknowledging it. Step 2 is reviewing it. Step 3 is intentionally building a plan to get out of it. And step 4 is having a way to measure how fast you're able to get out. And these are all things that I can help you with, but I also know that you can do this yourself. You can totally do this yourself. So I want you to feel empowered to do that. Empowered to do that. All right. That's it for episode 2, season 2 of the 4th draft. I'm Erin Trafford, by the way. Thanks so much for listening. All of my details with how to get in touch with me, if you want to check out more about Story Studio Network, book a call, all those lovely things are in the show notes. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active over there. It's the best place to send me a message or a connection request. I would invite you to do so. And in the next episode, I want to go specific with you because at SSN, we have done, by accident or on purpose, a lot of work with some not-for-profits. And I'm going to say something really bold in the next episode. I'm going to suggest that nonprofits are playing it too safe and that it's costing them. It's easily remedied, but we got to talk about it first. We got to shed some light on this. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll see you in the next episode.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.